The alien crew of the Zentara made a fatal mistake. They looked at the human's pet cat and saw a useless parasite. They saw a creature that slept all day, shed fur on their clean uniforms, and did absolutely no work. The captain wanted to throw the lazy beast out of the airlock to save oxygen. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that humans have lived with apex predators for thousands of years. When the ship enters the void belt, the advanced computers will go blind. The high-tech lasers will become useless. And the invisible monsters hiding in the walls will start to eat the ship alive. When the lights go out, the aliens will realize that the lazy orange cat is not a pet, he is the only security system that can save them. The galactic cruiser Zentara was the pride of the High Council fleet. It was a perfect machine. Every wall was white and shiny. Every light was bright, and every crew member was efficient. The crew belonged to a species called the Vex. The Vex were tall, thin, and gray. They did not have fun. They did not play games. They only cared about logic, work, and efficiency. To a Vex, if something was not useful, it was trash. This was the rule of the ship, and everyone followed it perfectly until the human arrived. Dave was the first human engineer to join the crew of the Zentara. Humans were a new species in the galaxy. They were known for being loud, messy, and very good at fixing broken engines with nothing but a hammer and bad language. Commander Czar, the leader of the ship, did not like humans, but the ship's hyperdrive was old, and Dave was the only one cheap enough to hire. When Dave walked onto the pristine, white docking bay, he looked out of place. His blue coveralls were stained with oil. His boots left dirty marks on the floor. But the thing that bothered Commander Czar the most was not the oil or the boots. It was the plastic carrier box Dave held in his hand. The crew gathered around as Dave set the box down in the main cargo bay. The Vex officers whispered to each other. They wondered what kind of advanced tool the human had brought. Perhaps it was a high-tech scanner, or a weapon to fight pirates. The box had holes in the side and a metal gate on the front. Commander Czar stepped forward and scanned the box with his wrist computer. The readings were confusing. The object inside had a heartbeat, but it was small and weak. It had no cybernetic implants. It had no armor. It seemed to have zero combat value. Dave unlatched the metal gate. The alien crew held their breath, ready to see a dangerous beast or a powerful machine. Instead, a paw reached out. It was covered in soft, orange fur. Then, a head appeared. It had two triangular ears, a pink nose, and big green eyes that looked bored. The creature walked out of the box, stretched its back into a long arch, and let out a loud yawn that showed all its tiny teeth. It was a cat. His name was Barnaby. But to the aliens, he was a mystery. Barnaby sat down on the cold metal floor and began to lick his leg. Commander Czar stared at the animal. He waited for it to do something useful. He waited for it to fix a wire, or guard a door, or analyze data. But Barnaby did not do any of those things. After licking his leg, the cat simply flopped onto his side and closed his eyes. The commander looked at Dave with confusion. He could not understand why an engineer would bring a biological organism that did nothing but sleep. To the Vex mind, this was a waste of resources. The creature consumed oxygen and food, but it provided no work in return. Over the next few weeks, the situation on the ship became tense. Barnaby was not a polite guest. The Vex were very clean creatures, but Barnaby shed his orange fur everywhere. It floated in the zero-gravity zones. It got stuck on the commander's black uniform. One day, the chief science officer found orange hair clogging the air intake of the laboratory. The aliens were horrified. They viewed the cat as a biohazard. They did not understand why Dave would keep such a useless thing. They started to call Barnaby the Parasite. The crew observed the human and his pet closely. They watched Dave in the cafeteria. Dave would open a packet of expensive protein mush, and instead of eating it all himself, he would put some in a bowl for the cat. Barnaby would eat it, make a strange vibrating noise in his throat, and then walk away without saying thank you. The aliens analyzed the vibrating noise. Their computers said it was a purr, but they could not find a logical reason for it. It did not heal wounds. It did not generate electricity. It was just a noise. This made the aliens even more frustrated. They believed that everything in the universe must have a function. If the cat had no function, it should not be on the ship. The breaking point happened in the navigation room. This was the most important room on the ship. The floor was warm because of the computer servers underneath. One afternoon, Commander Czar walked in to check the course. He stopped in shock. Barnaby was lying directly on top of the main navigation console. The cat was fast asleep, his belly rising and falling. He looked like a puddle of orange liquid. The navigator, a nervous Vex named Glip, was standing nearby, afraid to move the animal. Czar was furious. This was a violation of safety protocols. A biological obstruction on the control panel could cause a disaster. Commander Czar marched down to the engine room to find Dave. The human was under a heavy pipe, welding a leak. Czar stood over him and delivered the news. He explained that the creature was inefficient. He listed the crimes: shedding fur, stealing food, blocking consoles, and sleeping for 18 hours a day. The logic was undeniable. The ship was entering a dangerous sector of space known as the Void Belt. They could not afford to carry dead weight. Czar ordered Dave to eject the animal out of the airlock. Dave stopped working. He pushed his welding goggles up to his forehead. For the first time, the human did not look friendly. His face became hard. He stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked the tall alien commander in the eye. He explained that the cat stayed, or the human left. He told Czar that the ship needed an engineer more than it needed to save a cup of food a day. He called Barnaby crew support. The commander found this statement ridiculous. Emotional support was not a valid function for a military vessel. However, Czar knew he needed Dave to keep the engines running through the Void Belt. Reluctantly, he agreed to let the beast stay, but he warned Dave that if the cat caused one more problem, it would be thrown into space. The ship continued its journey toward the dark part of the galaxy. The mood on board was heavy. The aliens looked at Barnaby with suspicion, and Barnaby looked at them with total indifference. The cat spent his days wandering the long, white hallways. He would stop at random spots and stare at the walls for minutes at a time. The aliens thought the cat was malfunctioning. They saw nothing on the walls. No bugs, no lights, nothing. They tapped their heads and whispered that the creature was broken. They did not know that Barnaby's ears could hear things their sensors missed. They did not know that his nose could smell changes in the air that their computers ignored. As the Zentara crossed the border into the Void Belt, the stars outside the window disappeared. The darkness was total. The ship grew quiet. The Vex crew sat at their stations, eyes glued to their screens, trusting their technology to keep them safe. In his quarters, Dave was asleep. But Barnaby was awake. The orange cat sat by the door, his tail twitching. His big green eyes were wide open. He was not looking at his food bowl. He was not looking at a toy. He was staring at the ventilation grate near the floor. Deep inside the walls of the ship, something small and metallic scurried in the dark. The useless passenger had found something. The Zentara moved deeper into the Void Belt. This area of space was known as a graveyard for ships. There were no stars here, only thick clouds of cosmic dust that blocked all light. Outside the thick glass windows, there was nothing but endless black. The ship's powerful engines pushed it forward, but the silence of the void seemed to press against the hull. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was calm but focused. The Vex crew members sat at their stations with straight backs. They watched their monitors with unblinking eyes. The computers were their eyes and ears. As long as the screens showed green lights, the Vex believed they were safe. They did not know that in the void belt, safety was an illusion. The first sign of trouble was not an alarm or a siren. It was much smaller. In the mess hall, Dave was drinking a cup of coffee. Suddenly, the liquid in his cup tilted to the left, even though the cup was flat on the table. The artificial gravity had flickered for just a second. Dave frowned and looked up at the ceiling lights. They buzzed with a low sound that wasn't there before. He was an engineer, and he knew the heartbeat of a ship. The rhythm was wrong. He tapped his comms badge to call the bridge, but the signal was fuzzy. Static filled his ear. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants, and decided to check the readings himself. On the bridge, Commander Czar was staring at the main view screen. The darkness outside was absolute. Suddenly, the lights on the bridge dimmed to 50% power. The crew stiffened. Czar demanded a status report immediately. The tactical officer typed furiously on his keyboard. He reported that all systems were normal. The sensors showed no enemy ships, no asteroids, and no radiation storms. According to the most advanced computer in the fleet, the ship was in perfect condition. But the lights flickered again, casting long, scary shadows across the commander's face. The computer was lying, but the aliens did not know how to doubt their machines. While the aliens panicked and checked their screens, a different kind of sensor was waking up in the crew quarters. Barnaby opened one eye. The orange cat had been sleeping on Dave's pillow, enjoying the warmth. But something had disturbed his rest. It was a sound. It was too high-pitched for the Vex to hear, and too quiet for the human to notice. It was a scratching sound. Scritch, scratch, click. It came from behind the metal wall panel near the floor. Barnaby's ears swiveled forward like tiny radar dishes. He stood up slowly, stretching his front legs, and jumped off the bed. The hunt was on. Barnaby walked into the corridor. Usually, he walked with a lazy shuffle, but now his movement was different. He lowered his belly close to the floor. His paws made no sound on the metal grating. He moved like a ghost. He stopped at a junction where two hallways met. To his left was the engine room, to his right was the life support storage. The Vex crew members ran past him, shouting orders and carrying tablets. They ignored the cat completely. To them, he was just a rug that moved. They were too busy looking for a technical fault to notice that the useless parasite was the only one who knew where the enemy was hiding. The cat followed the noise. The scratching was getting louder and faster. It sounded like 1,000 tiny legs moving over wires. Barnaby stopped in front of a heavy maintenance panel in Sector 4. This section of the ship was dark and cold. He sat down and stared at the blank white wall. He did not blink. His tail twitched back and forth, hitting the floor with a rhythmic thump, thump, thump. He let out a strange sound, a chattering noise that cats make when they see a bird they cannot reach. Ek ek ek. He stared at the wall with intense focus, his pupils growing wide and black until his green eyes were almost gone. A security officer named Vruk ran down the hallway. He was checking for hull breaches. He saw the cat sitting by the wall, chattering at nothing. Vruk stopped for a moment, confused. The alien thought the animal had finally lost its mind. The ship was losing power, the gravity was failing, and the human's pet was yelling at a piece of metal. Vruk shook his head and tapped his radio to report that the hallway was clear. He trusted his eyes, and his eyes saw only a wall. He did not understand that the cat was not looking at the wall, he was listening to what was inside it. Suddenly, the ship shook violently. The main lights died completely, replaced by spinning red emergency lights. The hum of the engine stopped. The silence that followed was terrifying. Then, the alarm finally screamed. Warning, reactor failure. The bridge crew shouted in panic. Their screens were now flashing red errors, but they still couldn't pinpoint the source. They said the reactor was overheating, but the cooling pumps were showing full power. It was a paradox. The logic of the computer had failed. The Vex were paralyzed by indecision. They needed data to act, and they had no data. Dave ran through the flashing red hallway, carrying his heavy toolbox. He needed to get to the reactor room before the ship became a frozen coffin. He rounded the corner and almost tripped over Barnaby. The cat was still sitting there, staring at the panel in Sector 4. Dave tried to shoo the cat away, but Barnaby refused to move. The cat hissed at the wall and swiped his claws against the metal. Dave stopped. He looked at the cat, then at the wall. He remembered the old days on Earth, in the old grain barns. Cats didn't stare at walls for no reason. Dave dropped to his knees beside the cat. He placed his hand on the metal panel. It was hot. Much hotter than a wall should be. He could feel a vibration underneath his palm, like millions of tiny teeth chewing. The aliens had been looking for a system error, a software glitch, or a broken fuse. They hadn't looked for a physical invasion. Dave realized the Vex sensors were looking for energy signatures, but whatever was behind this wall was hiding its presence. The cat, however, detected life. Commander Czar's voice boomed over the intercom, ordering all hands to the reactor room for a manual restart. But Dave grabbed his radio. He yelled for the commander to come to Sector 4 instead. He shouted that the problem wasn't in the reactor, the problem was in the walls. The commander argued, citing the sensor readings, but Dave cut him off. He told them to bring weapons. He looked down at Barnaby. The cat was now growling low in his throat, his fur standing up like spikes on his back. Barnaby was ready for war. The commander and a squad of security guards arrived a moment later. They looked nervous in the red emergency light. They saw the human engineer kneeling next to the hissing cat. Commander Czar looked at the blank wall and then at Dave. He asked where the enemy was. Dave pointed a laser cutter at the bolts of the wall panel. He told them to get ready. He said the sensors were wrong, and the cat was right. The aliens raised their plasma rifles, skeptical but desperate. Dave fired the cutter. Sparks flew as the bolts melted. With a heavy clank, the metal panel fell forward onto the floor. For a second, there was silence. Then, the darkness inside the wall moved. It was a carpet of silver and black. Thousands of tiny, robotic insects spilled out of the hole. They were Silica-Mites, the scourges of the void belt. They were small, metal-eating machines that swarmed like ants. They had been eating the ship's copper wiring, cutting the power bit by bit. The sensors hadn't seen them because the mites were made of the same metal as the ship. They were invisible to radar, but they were loud to a predator. The swarm hissed, a mechanical sound that chilled the blood. The aliens froze in horror. The invisible threat was finally revealed, and it was hungry. The metal panel hit the floor with a loud clang, but no one heard it. The sound was swallowed by the terrifying noise coming from inside the wall. It sounded like 1,000 pieces of glass breaking at the same time. The flash of the emergency lights revealed the nightmare hiding in the ship's veins. The Silica-Mites were not just a few bugs, they were a living carpet. Their bodies were made of polished chrome and silver. They had multiple legs that moved with blurring speed, and their mouths were glowing blue as they chewed through the thick power cables. They were eating the ship's electricity. They were feasting on the lifeblood of the Zentara. Commander Czar did not hesitate. He reacted with the training of a soldier. He shouted for his security team to fire. The hallway filled with the bright purple flashes of plasma rifles. The noise was deafening. The heat from the weapons singed the air, smelling of burnt ozone and melting plastic. The Vex guards were excellent marksmen. They could hit a target from a mile away in open space. But here, in a narrow hallway against a swarm of tiny, moving targets, their training was useless. The plasma bolts smashed into the wall, melting the steel and destroying the very pipes they were trying to save. The Silica-Mites were too fast. When a plasma bolt hit the wall, the mites simply flowed around it like liquid mercury. They did not break formation. In fact, some of the mites seemed to absorb the energy from the blasts. They glowed brighter and moved faster. The robotic bugs were designed to survive in deep space and eat energy. Shooting them with energy weapons was like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it. The more the aliens shot, the stronger the infestation became. One of the mites jumped from the wall and landed on a guard's armor. It immediately started chewing the metal. The guard screamed and swatted it off, but the panic began to spread among the crew. Dave grabbed the commander's arm and yelled for them to stop shooting. He pointed at the destruction. The guards had blasted huge holes in the corridor, but the swarm was untouched. The aliens ceased fire, their chests heaving with fear. They looked at the wall. The swarm of mites had stopped eating for a moment. Thousands of tiny, mechanical eyes turned toward the crew. The collective buzzing sound changed pitch. It became higher, sharper. The mites realized they were exposed. They knew they could not stay in the open wall cavity. They needed to go deeper, into places where the big, clumsy aliens could not follow. With a unified movement, the swarm scattered. It was chaotic and terrifying to watch. The silver mass broke apart into individual streams. They poured into the dark cracks between the floor plates. They squeezed into the tiny ventilation shafts that ran along the ceiling. They vanished into the substructure of the ship. Within seconds, the wall was empty, leaving only chewed wires and melted metal behind. The enemy had not been defeated, it had just moved to a better hiding spot. The silence that returned to the hallway was heavier than before. The red emergency lights continued to spin, casting long, moving shadows that looked like monsters. Commander Czar looked at his tablet. The screen was glitching, but the data was clear. He looked up at Dave with pale, gray skin. He reported the bad news. The sensors showed the swarm was moving toward the central core. They were heading for the main power coupling. This was the most critical part of the ship. It was the device that controlled the antimatter reactor. If the mites ate through the shielding of the main coupling, the magnetic field would collapse. The antimatter would touch the matter, and the Zentara would turn into a miniature supernova. They would be vaporized in an instant. The commander asked the computer for a solution. The artificial intelligence voice replied calmly. It estimated the time to critical failure was less than 60 minutes. It suggested flooding the ship with poison gas. Czar shook his head. Silica-Mites were robots, gas would not hurt them. The computer suggested freezing the ship. Czar rejected it, the mites could survive in the vacuum of space. The computer suggested sending in repair drones. Czar slammed his fist against the wall. Drones were too big to fit in the microvents where the mites were traveling. The Vex were trapped by their own design. They built big, impressive ships, but they had no defense against something so small. Dave stood in the middle of the panic, thinking hard. He looked at the heavy blast doors that led to the maintenance tunnels. The tunnels were a maze of pipes, cables, and darkness. A human could not fit in there. A Vex could not fit in there. Even a remote-controlled car would get stuck in the tight turns and vertical shafts. The enemy had the perfect advantage. They were in a fortress of tight spaces. The aliens began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to abandon the ship. Others wanted to keep shooting the walls. They were losing hope. They looked at their high-tech weapons with disgust. Technology had failed them. While the aliens argued and the human thought, Barnaby was busy. The cat had not run away during the shooting. He had crouched low behind a metal crate, his ears flat against his head. He was not afraid of the loud noises, he was annoyed by them. Now that the shooting had stopped, he came out. He walked over to the spot where the mites had disappeared into a floor grate. He sniffed the metal. He could smell the ozone and the strange, electric scent of the robotic bugs. His tail lashed back and forth. To Barnaby, this was not a galactic crisis. This was not a reactor failure. This was something much more simple. This was a mouse hunt. Dave looked down and saw the cat. Barnaby was pawing at the grate, trying to pry it open. He let out a sharp meow and looked at Dave. The engineer's eyes widened. He realized something the aliens had missed. The Vex saw the mites as a technical malfunction. They were trying to fix a machine. But Dave saw the mites for what they really were, pests. And when you have pests, you don't need a scientist. You don't need a soldier with a laser gun. You need an exterminator. You need a predator that is small, fast, and agile. You need a hunter that doesn't need a battery and doesn't need instructions. Dave picked up his heavy wrench and knelt beside the floor grate. He looked at Commander Zar. He told the alien to cancel the evacuation order. He said he had a plan. Zar looked at the human with disbelief. He asked what kind of plan could save the ship in less than an hour when their best weapons had failed. Dave pointed to the orange ball of fluff sitting on the floor. Zar laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He asked if the human intended to feed the pet to the robots. He called it madness. He said a primitive animal could not fight advanced nanotechnology. Dave ignored the insult. He used the wrench to unscrew the bolts of the floor grate. He lifted the heavy metal mesh, revealing a dark, dusty tunnel that went deep under the deck. It was a narrow passage, filled with twisted cables and sharp corners. It was a scary place. A warm, stale wind blew up from the darkness. The sound of the skittering mites echoed faintly from deep below. It sounded like thousands of tiny feet scratching on bone. Dave turned to Barnaby. He didn't use a command code. He didn't type on a keyboard. He just scratched the cat behind the ears, right in the spot that made Barnaby's back leg kick. The engineer spoke softly to the cat. He told Barnaby that there were bad mice down there. He pointed into the dark hole. Barnaby looked into the tunnel. His pupils expanded until his eyes were almost entirely black. The lazy, sleepy house cat vanished. The muscles in his shoulders bunched up. His whiskers twitched forward, sensing the air currents. He let out a low, menacing growl that vibrated in the floor. The ancient instinct of 1,000,000 years of evolution took over. The apex predator of Earth was waking up. The aliens watched in silence, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. They were about to see why humans kept these small beasts in their homes. Dave stepped back from the open hole. The dark tunnel breathed cold air into the warm hallway. Barnaby stood at the edge of the metal precipice. The orange cat looked down into the abyss where the wires twisted like snakes. He did not look scared. He looked curious. His tail flicked once, a sign of excitement. Then, without making a sound, he slipped over the edge. He did not jump clumsily, he poured himself into the hole like water. One moment he was there, and the next moment, the hallway was empty. The useless passenger had gone into the belly of the ship to do a job that no high-tech machine could do. Commander Zar stared at the empty grate. He felt a mix of confusion and hopelessness. He turned to his tactical officer and ordered him to bring up the internal maintenance cameras. He wanted to see how long the creature would survive. The officer typed the commands, and the large main screen on the wall flickered to life. The picture was grainy and green because it was using low-light night vision. The camera showed the inside of the ventilation shaft. It was a tight, ugly place filled with dust and sharp metal edges. At first, the screen seemed empty. Then, they saw a pair of glowing eyes floating in the darkness. The aliens watched in silence as the cat moved. They expected the animal to be slow and careful, stumbling over the pipes. They were wrong. Barnaby moved with a terrifying grace. He stayed low to the ground, his body stretching and compressing to fit through the narrow gaps. His paws were soft, hiding his deadly claws, so he made zero noise. The sensitive microphones in the wall picked up nothing. Not a footstep, not a breath. To the alien sensors, the cat was a ghost. The Vex crew members were used to robots that clanked and buzzed. They were unnerved by a biological machine that operated in total silence. Deeper in the ship, the swarm of Silica-Mites was busy. The camera feed switched to a different sector, closer to the reactor. The screen showed hundreds of the silver bugs crawling over a junction box. They were working together, chewing through the thick insulation to get to the copper underneath. They were efficient and mindless. They did not know they were being hunted. They did not have sensors for smell or soft vibrations. They continued to eat, unaware that a predator was closing the distance. On the screen, a shadow appeared behind the bugs. Barnaby had arrived. He paused for a second, assessing the situation. The aliens on the bridge held their breath. They expected the cat to run away from the swarm. Instead, Barnaby's rear legs wiggled slightly as he prepared to launch. He picked a target. A large mite, perhaps a scout, was separated from the main group. In a blur of orange fur, the cat pounced. The movement was so fast that the camera almost missed it. One moment the bug was there, and the next, it was pinned under two white paws. Barnaby did not use logic. He used instinct. He bit down hard on the metal casing of the robot bug. His teeth were sharp, and his jaw was strong. There was a loud crunch that echoed through the ship's speakers. The Silica-Mite sparked and died instantly. The cat spat the broken pieces out and looked up. The noise had alerted the other bugs. The swarm turned. Hundreds of tiny mechanical eyes focused on the single cat. A normal creature would have been terrified. A human would have run. But Barnaby just flattened his ears and hissed. To him, these were not dangerous killer robots. They were just shiny cockroaches, and he was the king of the house. The battle in the vents began. It was chaotic and fast. The mites rushed at the cat, trying to bite him with their metal mandibles. But Barnaby was an apex predator. His reflexes were biological miracles. When a mite jumped at him, he swatted it out of the air with a paw. The force of the hit smashed the delicate robot into the wall, shattering it into pieces. He twisted his body in mid-air to avoid attacks, landing on the walls and sealing pipes with perfect balance. He was a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The narrow space, which would have trapped a human or a large robot, was his playground. Back on the bridge, the aliens were stunned. Commander Czar's mouth was slightly open. He looked at the data scrolling on his tablet. The computer was trying to analyze the cat's combat performance. The numbers were impossible. The creature's reaction time was faster than the ship's targeting computers. Its agility rating was off the charts. The tactical officer whispered that the animal was a biological weapon. They looked at Dave with new fear. They realized that humans shared their homes with these monsters. They slept next to them. The aliens wondered if humans were brave or just insane. Barnaby continued to push forward. He was not just defending himself, he was clearing a path. He left a trail of broken robot parts behind him. He was heading toward the main nest. He could hear the hum of the queen mite near the reactor core. The smaller bugs tried to swarm him, to overwhelm him with numbers, but the tight tunnel worked in Barnaby's favor. They could only come at him from the front, and anything that came from the front got destroyed. The cat was tired, his breathing was heavy, and he had a small cut on his nose from a sharp wire, but he did not stop. The hunt was the only thing that mattered. The chase led into the vertical shaft directly above the reactor room. This was the most dangerous part. It was a straight drop down. The Silica-Mites were climbing up the walls, trying to escape the fury of the orange beast. Barnaby looked down. He saw the glowing blue light of the reactor core far below. He saw the massive cluster of mites gathering around the final power cable. If they cut that cable, the ship would die. Barnaby didn't understand the science, but he understood that the bad mice were gathering in one spot. This was his chance to catch them all. Dave watched the screen, his fists clenched. He knew the cat was exhausted. He whispered for Barnaby to be careful. But the cat did not hesitate. He extended his claws fully, hooking them into the soft insulation of the shaft walls. He began to climb down, head first, defying gravity. He moved like a liquid shadow descending into the heart of the machine. The aliens watched with respect. They had called him a parasite. They had called him useless. But now, as the red warning lights flashed and the ship groaned, they realized that the small, fluffy creature was the only thing standing between them and total destruction. The useless passenger had become the ship's last hope. The heart of the Zentara was the main reactor room. It was usually a clean, silent place where the blue glow of the antimatter core provided a soothing light. But now, it looked like a nightmare. The room was bathed in angry red emergency lights that strobed on and off, creating a disorienting effect. The air was incredibly hot, smelling of burnt plastic and ozone. In the center of the room, the massive main power cable, which was as thick as a tree trunk, was covered in a writhing layer of silver. The Silica-Mites were swarming over it, stripping away the protective layers. They were only inches away from the raw energy conduit. If they touched it, the resulting explosion would erase the ship from existence. On the bridge, the Vex crew watched the main view screen in horror. The camera feed from the reactor room showed the hopelessness of the situation. There were too many bugs. Commander Czar gripped the edge of his console until his knuckles turned white. The computer voice announced that there were only 3 minutes remaining until critical failure. The aliens looked at Dave. The human engineer was not looking at the timer. He was looking at the ventilation grate high up on the reactor room wall. He was whispering a silent prayer to the ancient gods of Earth, or perhaps just to the spirit of the cat. He knew that Barnaby was their only card left to play. Suddenly, the grate high on the wall burst open. It didn't fall out, it was kicked out. A cloud of dust puffed into the air, and then a shape launched itself into the room. It was Barnaby. The cat fell through the air, his limbs spread out to control his descent. To the aliens, he looked small and insignificant against the massive machines. But Barnaby did not land hard. He twisted his body in mid-air and landed on top of a cooling pipe with silent perfection. He crouched there for a moment, looking down at the army of robot bugs. His orange fur was dirty with soot, and his tail was puffing up to twice its normal size. He looked like a wild beast, not a pet. The arrival of the predator changed the rhythm of the swarm. The smaller mites stopped eating and turned their sensors toward the new threat. But the real danger was not the small bugs. From the center of the mass on the power cable, a large shape emerged. It was the queen mite. She was 5 times bigger than the others, with a body made of polished black chrome and eyes that glowed a menacing purple. She had large, serrated pincers that snapped the air with a loud click-click sound. She was the brain of the swarm, and she recognized that the furry intruder was a threat to her harvest. Barnaby let out a sound that the Vex had never heard before. It wasn't a meow, and it wasn't a purr. It was a low, guttural yowl that started deep in his chest and rose to a terrifying scream. It was a war cry. He did not wait for the enemy to attack. He jumped from the high pipe, landing directly onto the thick power cable, right in the middle of the swarm. The small mites tried to bite his paws, but he was a blur of motion. He swatted them away with force, sending broken metal bodies flying into the dark corners of the room. He was clearing the ring for the main event. He wanted the queen. The queen mite scurried forward on her multiple metal legs. She was fast, much faster than the soldiers. She lunged at Barnaby, her pincers snapping at his throat. The alien crew gasped, thinking the cat was done for. But Barnaby was a creature of liquid reflexes. He flattened his body against the cable, letting the queen's attack pass harmlessly over his head. In the same second, he rolled onto his back and raked his back claws against the queen's underbelly. Sparks flew as his claws found the gaps in her armor. The Queen screeched, a horrible electronic sound of pain and rage. The fight that followed was a clash between biology and technology. The Queen-Mite had strength and armor. She could crush steel with her jaws. But Barnaby had millions of years of evolutionary hunting software installed in his brain. He was fighting a mouse that fought back, and this made him sharper. He leaped over the Queen, landing behind her to bite at her rear legs. When she turned to snap at him, he was already gone, jumping to the side. He used the environment to his advantage, bouncing off the walls and pipes to gain speed. He was confusing the Queen's targeting sensors. She could not predict where the orange blur would strike next. Commander Czar watched the screen with wide eyes. He had spent his whole life studying war, tactics, and advanced weaponry. He believed that superior technology always won. Yet, here was a primitive organic creature dismantling a sophisticated machine with nothing but teeth and attitude. He realized that the Vex had forgotten the power of raw instinct. The cat was not calculating probabilities, he was flowing with the moment. Czar looked at Dave with a new level of respect. He understood now why humans survived on their death world of a planet. They allied themselves with monsters. The battle reached its climax. The Queen-Mite, realizing she was losing the physical fight, decided to end the mission. She turned her back on Barnaby and lunged for the exposed copper of the power core. She opened her massive jaws, ready to bite down and trigger the explosion. She was willing to sacrifice herself to destroy the ship. The timer on the bridge screen hit 10 seconds. The crew screamed. There was no time for Barnaby to bite her again. He was too far away. The distance was too great. But Barnaby saw the movement. His hunter's brain understood the prey was trying to escape. He didn't run, he coiled his muscles like a loaded spring. He focused all his energy into his back legs. He launched himself through the air like an orange missile. It was a desperate, impossible leap. Just as the Queen's mandibles were about to close around the wire, Barnaby slammed into her side. The force of the impact knocked her off the cable. They both tumbled off the main conduit and fell onto the metal grating floor below. They landed in a tangled ball of fur and metal. The Queen tried to rise, but Barnaby was finished playing. He pinned her down with his front paws, his weight pressing her into the floor. He opened his mouth wide and delivered the killing bite. His sharp canine teeth crunched through the delicate sensor array on the Queen's neck. There was a bright flash of blue electricity, a final mechanical shriek, and then the Queen went limp. Her purple eyes flickered and went dark. The effect was instant. As soon as the Queen died, the hive mind was broken. The thousands of smaller mites on the cable froze. Without the control signal from their leader, they were just confused, simple machines. They stopped eating. They stopped moving. They simply fell off the walls and the cables like dead leaves, clattering onto the floor. The buzzing sound that had filled the ship for the last hour suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and beautiful. In the reactor room, the red emergency lights stopped flashing. The cool, white lights flickered back on. The computer voice spoke calmly, announcing that the threat had been neutralized and the reactor was stable. Barnaby stood over the broken body of the Queen-Mite. He was panting, his sides heaving in and out. He had a small burn mark on his ear and his fur was a mess, but he stood tall. He looked up at the camera lens in the corner of the room. He blinked his big green eyes slowly, licked his paw, and began to clean his face. He did not look like a hero who had just saved a galactic cruiser. He just looked like a cat who was satisfied that the annoying bug was finally dead. The silence in the reactor room was no longer terrifying, it was peaceful. The red emergency strobes had stopped, replaced by the steady, calming hum of the white service lights. The ship's engines began to purr again, a deep vibration that told the crew they were safe. Dave walked into the reactor room with slow, heavy steps. He had run all the way from the bridge, his heart pounding in his chest, afraid that he would find his friend injured. When the heavy blast doors slid open, he saw the battlefield. The floor was littered with the crushed silver bodies of the Silica-Mites. It looked like a robot graveyard. And there, sitting on top of the defeated queen, was Barnaby. The cat was calmly licking a spot of soot off his left paw. He looked up at Dave, let out a short, demanding squeak, and stood up. He did not look like a warrior who had just saved 1,000 lives. He just looked like a cat who was ready for dinner. Dave picked Barnaby up, ignoring the dirt and the black oil that smeared onto his uniform. He checked the cat carefully. Aside from a singed ear and a few missing tufts of fur, the animal was unharmed. Dave buried his face in the cat's neck, breathing in the smell of ozone and dusty fur. He felt a wave of relief so strong his knees almost shook. He carried the cat out of the reactor room, holding him like a precious treasure. As they walked back toward the bridge, the atmosphere on the ship had changed completely. Before, the corridors were places of panic and judgment. Now, they were hallways of reverence. The Vex crew members stopped their repairs as Dave walked past. These tall, gray aliens, who usually looked at humans with arrogance, now pressed their backs against the walls to make room. They stared at the orange bundle of fur in Dave's arms with wide, black eyes. They did not see a useless parasite anymore. They saw a biological machine of destruction. One young ensign, who had previously complained about Barnaby's shedding, slowly raised his hand in a formal military salute as the cat passed. The Vex respected efficiency above all else, and Barnaby had proven to be the most efficient killer on the ship. The rumor had already spread, the human's pet had done what the ship's advanced lasers could not. When Dave entered the bridge, the room went quiet. Commander Czar turned away from the main view screen. The captain looked at the human and the cat. For a long moment, there was only silence. Czar, a proud military leader, was struggling with a difficult reality. He had to admit that his logic was flawed. He had wanted to throw the cat out of the airlock, and that action would have doomed them all. The commander stepped forward, his stiff posture softening slightly. He looked at Barnaby, who was currently trying to chew on one of the buttons on Dave's shirt. Czar extended a long, gray finger, hesitated, and then awkwardly touched the top of the cat's head. It was the first time a Vex had ever petted an animal. Barnaby pushed his head up into the touch and purred, the sound echoing loudly in the silent room. Commander Czar cleared his throat and announced that he was making an official correction to the ship's log. He walked to his command console and typed a new entry. He deleted the file that labeled Barnaby as Class C Cargo, non-essential. Instead, he created a new file. He classified the species Felis catus as a Class 5 independent security unit. He noted that the creature possessed superior sensors, stealth capabilities, and close-quarters combat protocols that exceeded Vex programming. The crew nodded in agreement. It was a logical decision. They decided that from this day forward, the cat would have full clearance to roam the ship. If Barnaby wanted to sleep on a console, it was obviously for security reasons. The commander then turned to the matter of a reward. In Vex culture, a warrior who saved the ship was given a high honor. They were usually offered gold, a promotion, or a new weapon. Czar asked Dave what the security unit desired. He was ready to offer a pouch of rare crystals or perhaps a medal made of titanium. He wanted to know what payment the mercenary required for his services. The aliens leaned in, expecting the human to ask for something valuable. They wondered what kind of treasure a creature of such power would hoard. Dave smiled, a tired but happy smile. He explained that Barnaby did not care about gold. He did not care about medals or rank. He told the commander that the hero required something much simpler. He asked for the finest fish the ship's kitchen could synthesize. Specifically, he requested the premium tuna surprise, a dish usually reserved for visiting diplomats. The commander looked confused. He asked if that was truly all the beast wanted. He could not understand how a savior could be satisfied with mere calories. Dave laughed and assured him that for Barnaby, a full bowl of fish was worth more than a planet made of gold. The feast was held in the main mess hall. It was a surreal sight. The entire senior staff of the Zentara stood in a circle around a small plastic bowl on the floor. The ship's chef, a nervous Vex who usually cooked for admirals, had prepared the tuna with extreme care. He placed the bowl down gently, as if it were a bomb. Barnaby walked up to the bowl, sniffed it suspiciously, and then began to eat. The room was silent, except for the wet, smacking sounds of the cat eating. The aliens watched with intense fascination. They analyzed his jaw movement and his caloric intake. To them, this was a sacred ritual of refueling a combat engine. To Dave, it was just his cat having a good dinner. After the meal, Barnaby did what cats do best. He walked over to Commander Czar's boot, rubbed his cheek against it to claim the captain as his property, and then flopped down in the middle of the walkway to sleep. In the past, Czar would have been furious. He would have shouted about regulations and tripping hazards. But now, the commander simply stepped carefully over the sleeping ball of orange fur. He signaled for the crew to walk around. He whispered that the security unit was in recharge mode and should not be disturbed. The journey continued, but life on the Zentara was different. The aliens treated Dave with a new kind of caution. They realized that humans were a strange and dangerous species. Humans did not just build machines, they bonded with nature's perfect killers. They kept miniature tigers in their homes and called them friends. The Vex decided it was best never to make a human angry, because you never knew what other monsters they might be hiding in their pockets. And as for Barnaby, he enjoyed his new life. He had fresh fish every day, warm vents to sleep on, and a whole crew of gray servants who were terrified of him. He was no longer a passenger. He was the king of the ship.